Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Women's Sport Forum live Q&A. My name is Myriam Glez. I will be your host today. I'm a former Olympic synchronized swimmer and the founder of Athlete Soul, and I'm also a big supporter of Women Athlete and the Women's Sports Forum. So the Women's Sports Forum is an initiative to support active and retired women athletes to succeed on and off the field. And today's event is part of this effort. We want to help female athletes with their health and wellness and answer questions and topics that may have not otherwise been covered. So please note that this event is recorded and will be available on the Women's Sports Forum website. We will also share it with you via email after this event. Before we get started, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Greg Charlop, and he's going to talk to you about the Women's Sports Forum and as well as our sponsor. To you, Greg.
Hi, I'm Dr. Greg Charlop, known as Dr. Greg in the sports world, and I'm a co-founder of the Women's Sports Forum, and I'm the founder of Retired Athlete Health. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. We're very excited because we believe that women athletes deserve better. And we're all here today because we're bringing in the world's experts to try to help women athletes, whether it's with mental health issues, sports performance, nutrition, diet. Today, we're talking about hormones and athletic performance. And we're trying to mobilize the sports community on behalf of our women athletic leaders. And we believe they deserve it, and we believe that we can do it. So we're really glad that you could join us today. And we want to thank, we have 4 sponsors for today's event that we'd love to thank, and we're glad you were able to make this possible. She Media, which is one of the top websites for women on the internet who are looking for pretty much anything. So go check out She Media. We're also sponsored by the Sports Philanthropy Network, which does great work throughout the sports world to try to encourage more charity and philanthropic work. Athletes for Care, which helps organize athletes and retired athletes into different activities that will help promote them, the athletes, for their growth, help them after retirement, and help sponsors who work with athletes. And of course, Athlete Soul, which is Myriam's group, and they've been with us every step of the way in helping women athletes and athletes of all kinds during and after retirement. So thank you to our sponsors, and thank you for all of us for joining today. Myriam, back to you.
And Greg, thanks for taking the time to be here, but also founding the Women's Sports Forum. I think we forgot to mention that. We wouldn't be here if you hadn't started this initiative, so thanks for that. So today I'm super excited about this discussion because we're going to talk about female hormones and their impact on performance and well-being. And we're going to be doing this with Dr. Greg Charlop as well as Dr. Nicola Keay, who is here from England. And so I want to say a few words on Nikki and her background before we get started. So she works with dancers and athletes of all ages to ensure personal hormone health and optimal performance. She studied medicine at Cambridge University. She researches, lectures, and writes in the field of sport medicine, exercise science, and relative energy deficiency in sports. She was also part of the international medical team, which developed an anti-doping test for the growth hormone. Nikki, thanks for joining us. Welcome. Anything else you want to add to your intro?
No, listen, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to discussing this super important topic about female hormones.
Thank you, Nikki. So we have received a lot of questions ahead of this discussion, and we're going to start answering those questions first. But you can still ask a lot of questions throughout the event, so I encourage you to do that in the Q&A. I will take notes of your question, and I will ask Dr. Greg and Dr. Nikki through the event. But let's jump right in with the first question. Nikki, can you tell us how our hormones relate to and impact performance?
Well, hormones are internal chemical messengers in each and every one of us, and that they are the link between our behaviors. So for an athlete, we're talking about training load, we're talking about nutrition, we're talking about recovery and sleep. So hormones take on board what you're doing, and they literally translate that to the DNA and tell your cells what proteins to make. And so in that way, hormones quite literally support your health, and therefore, if you're healthy, of course, that means your performance, your athletic performance. So that is why, that's why I study hormones, because they are absolutely crucial. And I'm really looking forward to discussing ways you personally listening to this can harness those hormones to make sure you're in your best form in terms of health and optimal performance.
Nikki, at the Women's Sports Forum, we actually had a panelist who said something, and I love it. She said that a women's period is actually a superpower. And in other words, if you time things correctly, there are certain times that women have a huge advantage over themselves normally, and even over men in terms of performance, pain tolerance, endurance, because of their hormones. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, well, periods, menstrual periods, so I'm not talking on any external hormones, whether that's birth control or anything, but a woman bleeding every month, it doesn't sound that great, does it? But actually, it's an amazing free medical monthly check. It says, yes, my hormones are doing what they should do inside. You can't see your hormones, you can't touch them. But as women, we have a direct connection to what our hormones are doing by having this monthly period menstruation. But you're absolutely right. On the other hand, it's fair to say that it can be challenging if your hormones are changing a lot during the menstrual cycle. But equally, if you get to know and understand your personal variation in hormones, you're absolutely right, Greg. You can harness these to your advantage. Get to know and love your menstrual cycle. And for you personally, when do you feel good and when do you maybe not feel so good, and that's when you need to pay attention, even more attention to the finer details about recovery, etc. But I think this important, really important thing to say is that every woman is different. Every woman is an individual and it's personal to you. So we're going to be discussing, some things to look out for, what you personally can do, given that you want to harness these female hormones.
And Nikki, so you're talking about your menstruation, your period every month as one way, obviously, to identify your cycle. Are there other ways to monitor female hormones?
Well, it's quite tricky, to be absolutely honest. Certainly menstrual tracking and, recording when you have your period, and so you can know your own personal timing, is a very, very good starting point, and something that we have recently started doing with a ballet company I work with. So that everybody can do that. It doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to be complicated. It can be pen and paper, whatever you want. To actually measure the hormones, that is challenging, because I've just told you that every woman is different, you see? And so the timing is going to be subtly different. And so generally in medicine, we tend to do a blood test. Really is the gold standard for measuring the hormones, okay? So we could measure, when are we going to measure these? And just recently, and I think you put it probably too long to discuss in detail right at this moment, but suffice to say, I'm very, very excited that we have developed a way of effectively making lovely graphs of your personal hormone variation using artificial intelligence techniques. But as I say, I won't go into the full details because I'll get very excited and I'll be talking about the whole hour about it. And I know we don't want that, but please look at the article that I think you put on the website. So there is always progress. Things are always changing. But if you're listening to this, then first of all, just make a note. So track your cycles, pen and paper is fine. Okay, and also make a note of how you're feeling. So you get to know how you feel during the cycle, like Dr. Greg said, very important that you know when's good, when it's not so good for you, what you have to do. You can look out for other things, signs of ovulation, your body temperature tends to go up a little bit, the cervical mucus changes. These are things that don't cost any money, you can do. In terms of actually measuring the hormones, speak to me, and hopefully it's something we can do in the UK now, and I'm hoping worldwide soon, because after all, it's data. And so watch this space, basically.
And the tricky part with measuring hormones, like you're mentioning, is that for women, their hormones change all the time. So if you were to, let's say, go into the doctor's office tomorrow and they drew your estrogen level, you can't say your estrogen level is X, whatever the lab result is, because that's just what it happened to be at that moment, depending on where you are in your menstrual cycle.
Exactly. So generally, if you do go to the doctor's office, generally we say to women, do it on day 3 of your cycle. But that is just so we have a bearing. We know, okay, we know exactly where we are. But the downside of that, in terms of hormones, that's when they're at their most quiescent, they will be at their lowest. So to be honest, it gives very limited information. But you're absolutely right. This is the tricky thing about the timing of female hormones, because they vary so much, like 100-fold, massive differences, and every woman's timing will be slightly different, which is why we've developed this new way of modeling the hormones just based on 2 measurements. But you're right, in general terms, it's really, really tricky. So just for women listening to this, just be aware of that. And so when you do go and get a blood test, you will probably be suggested you do this one-off test, but bear in mind it's actually quite limited information, and doing all these other things is also really, really helpful to get in tune, get in touch with your hormones.
And I think if you're listening to this and you're worried about your hormones, I think you're wise to do what Dr. Nikki said and really keep track, even with pen and paper, of how your body's doing, and try to do it if you can over a couple months. When your periods start, changes in temperature, there are even some free online tools that will help you with this. Then if you go into the doctor armed with that data, you'll have a good sense of where you are in your cycle, and the doctor will be able to help you more. So I think we all women athletes and all women, truthfully, will benefit from keeping track of this. And then you could also match it up with your sports performance.
Exactly. I think you made such a good point, because after all, athletes love data. We measure, our power output if you're a cyclist. We measure our heart rate. We measure this and that. We measure all these things about our training. Yet we should definitely match that up and record our own data in terms of, and it's, how you feel. And this is what we do with the ballet company I mentioned. Every morning they log and they say, how are they feeling in the morning, ready to go, ready to train, not so good, not so whatever. And then they also click when they have their period. And then I can look at that. They can have that information, but also I look at it from the medical advisory point of view, and I can see, oh, look, this dancer, every time she's having a period or every time she's just about to have her period, she's always saying she's not feeling good. So then I would get in contact with her and say, fine, let's figure out some things that we can do to try and help this. Because you prepare everything for a race, don't you? You prepare, well, I'm talking about dancing. I would prepare my best pair of point shoes. I have my costume ready. I have everything in my mind. I've learned the choreography. I'm ready to go. But sometimes we get so carried away with all of that, we actually forget about us, ourselves. How are we feeling? But if you have all that information, like you say, Greg, recorded, so you know where you're going to be in your cycle, and you can have practiced what you're going to do. If it happens, you can't change the date of the competition, can you? That's fixed. But if you know, look, that competition or whatever, or important session or whatever it is going to fall exactly that time of the period where I'm not feeling so great, a few months before, like you said, Greg, you're already going to know that, and you're going to have practiced and found out what's going to work for you to make sure you can do the best you can. And that's what I do with the dancers, so that they're prepared. Whatever the first opening night is of Swan Lake, or each one of them will feel confident that they have got not only all their costumes and their point shoes and everything organized and ready, they've also got themselves ready mentally. And if you feel confident mentally, of course, the physical also falls into place.
And so, Nikki, this is a lot about tracking, planning, just like we do with our performance. But I'd like to get into the irregular cycle, because it's really what affects a lot of female athletes. At some point in their career, they will have some irregularity with their menstruation. So does that mean there is something wrong with their hormones if they have irregular periods? In
a very short answer, yes, but So yes, I agree with you. Listen, even women who aren't athletes, if they go through a particularly stressful time, the effect of stress on your periods and your hormones, that can make your periods a little bit irregular. So, the odd irregular period, or just for a brief time, they're not exactly as you would expect. That's understandable, but appreciating why that might be, just doing a self-check. Oh, yes, that actually was because I had a very heavy training block. That was because I was under a lot of stress. I had an argument with my partner, or whatever it is, you see, trying to figure out why that might be. But when push comes to shove, if the periods remain irregular, and for example, if you have less than 9 periods per year, or if your periods stop for 3 months or more, or certainly in the UK would say 6 months, at that point, definitely it needs looking into. It could be a medical condition that needs sorting out, but also it could be that actually you need to have a look at your training load, your nutrition and your recovery. It may be something to do with your behaviors that we spoke about at the beginning that is disrupting your hormones. So the summary is, if anyone's listening to this and your periods have been consistently irregular, or they had stopped for 3 months or more, number one, absolutely, you do need to see your doctor, or get into contact with me or Greg, and we need to figure out, make sure there's nothing medical going on. But then the next step would be, you need to go back and have a look at the training load. Is it periodized? Are you eating the right, your nutrition, all those sorts of things.
And I think I'm really glad that you mentioned, Dr. Nikki, about getting an evaluation, because we've all heard that women athletes can have irregular periods or even lose their periods altogether. And the first instinct, if you're a woman athlete listening to this with irregular periods, may be to just assume that it's because of your sport. But it could be for something that has nothing to do with your sport at all. It could be, like you mentioned, stress. Maybe you're in an abusive relationship, or you're stressed at work, or you have financial stresses. It could be a medical problem completely unrelated to your sport. And that needs to be evaluated before we just assume, oh, it's because you're an athlete, and it's easy just to blame the sports, but that may not be the cause. So I agree with you that the first step needs to be a careful evaluation to make sure it's not something else, and maybe something serious that you need to correct.
Yeah, and also I think the other thing, I see a lot of the athletes and dancers that say that have been told either by another doctor or teammates or coaches, or it's normal for women, for athletes to lose their periods. But I just want to emphasize it's definitely not. It's normal physiology to have your periods. So, and also just because something is common doesn't now suddenly make it normal. Like, unfortunately, at the other end of the spectrum, we have an explosion in obesity and type 2 diabetes at the other end of the scale. And yet we don't suddenly turn around and say, oh, now it's normal for everyone to have type 2 diabetes. So I think the same thing for periods. And I think that's a really important point you make, Greg. Don't hesitate. It's much better to be sure, much better to see what's going on if there's something that needs sorting out medically, or actually does it mean you just have to go back and look at the behaviors and see how you can manage those better to support healthy hormones.
So I'm curious, Dr. Nikki, let's say someone has irregular periods. It's lasted for long enough that they go to the doctor. They get checked out and it's not something else. It's not stress from work. It's not cancer. It's not anything else. It's their sport. What would you recommend at that point? Should they just watch it? Should they treat it? If so, what should they do?
Well, that's exactly that's my job. That's what I do, exactly as you say. I will go through the blood test, make sure there's nothing untoward going on, and sort that out. But as you say, then it comes out, actually, it's what we say, a diagnosis of exclusion. I've excluded anything that I need to straight away get in some medical input. And then actually the next step I do with the athlete or the dancer is let's just go through the week. I ask them, training, when your training sessions, what your training sessions, when you're eating, what are you eating? Okay, so take a detailed history of what they're doing. And from that, it's usually pretty obvious that there's actually something right. I've seen a lot of athletes doing fasted training in the morning. Your hormones definitely don't like that, by the way. And so if the first thing, if they say, oh, I get up, I do early training, and I said, oh, did you have breakfast or do you eat something first? And then, so it could be something to do with the nutrition, the timing isn't right. They could be they're not eating enough carbohydrate. It could be that they're not, haven't got periodized training. So all of it is the same, hard. The body doesn't respond to everything the same. You need light and shade, so periodized training. So some weeks are harder, some weeks are easier. Typically it's 3 harder weeks and 1 easy week, something like that. So really getting to grips with the details of those things. But often many doctors just do the medical bit. They just say, oh, there isn't a medical problem, and leave it there. But actually, I'm quite fussy. Anyway, I'm curious. I want to know. I want to figure it out. I want to help people sort this, women sort this. So we go through the details, like I said, and then it's often you can pick up on little things. And it's not, normally in my experience, it's not just one thing. It's not just that they're doing fasted training. It's that they're doing some fasted training and they're not getting to bed really late, and that they're not doing, every little thing, it all works together. So that's my approach.
Dr. Nikki, what about weight? Because a lot of times we see this in people who do aesthetic sports, like dance, for example, where appearance makes a big difference and weight is very important. And a lot of times those women suffer from these irregular periods. Do you recommend that they gain weight if their periods are irregular?
Well, synchronized swimming is another thing, another aesthetic sport, is it not, Myriam? So rhythmic gymnastics, any sport against gravity. So it's aesthetic, but it's sports against gravity, climbing, road cycling, anything long distance running. So there is this perception that being lighter or looking a certain way means you're going to be better, faster. And to an extent, I have to say, yeah, it's true. But there's a limit, and the body will tell you what that is. Okay, so for a woman, your periods being the barometer of your internal hormones. So if you are a dancer or one of these aesthetic sports, as you described, or weight dependent sports, your body will tell you if you're pushing it too far. But sometimes, so if the person's very underweight, that will be kind of like obvious. But sometimes I see lots of female athletes who are not underweight, but they're just on the cusp. And actually what's happening is that they're just not fueling consistently. And so the body has been very clever, and it's not letting them lose any more weight. The body has adapted. It's down-regulated the hormones. It's saving energy. It's gone to an energy-saving mode. That's why their periods become irregular or stop, because it's a good way to save energy if you're a woman. And so weight is a factor, but sometimes it's more subtle than that. It's not just the number on the scale, because that's just a measurement of gravity after all. It's not a measurement of how good an athlete you are, is it? Anyway, so I know it's easy to get fixated on the weight, but I want to reassure any athletes listening to this. If you are definitely underweight, I will say so, okay? But lots of them actually aren't underweight, but they're just on the cusp of being underweight, or just on the verge that the body is not happy. So if you're thinking, oh my goodness, she's just going to say put on weight and I can't do that and everything, I'm not necessarily going to say that, unless you definitely are and you've got an eating disorder. Then I'm afraid there's no two ways about it. But that's my experience. Do you agree, Greg? Sometimes it's just the finer detail of it, not the weight on the scale per se.
No, I agree. And as you kind of hinted at, for a lot of people, intentionally increasing their weight would be a deal killer. And if you recommended that, you just won't see them in your office again.
Exactly.
So it's not something to be taken lightly, if you'll pardon the pun. Obviously.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it can be the subtleties. It can be the subtleties, like I say. So sometimes they're pleasantly surprised. It might not be the weight. It's just that they're doing this fasted training, or it's just they're not eating carbohydrate during the day and they have a whole pile at the end of the day. And female hormones are very, very sensitive to energy availability, how much energy is in the tank consistently throughout the day. And if they see that there's not enough, then the body is very sensible. It will just shut that down. So there have been studies to show that very, precisely. So as I say, it's the detail of the timing and the type of nutrition and the type of exercise you're doing, all those things. So, you know, weight, it's one of those things, but sometimes, as you say, Greg, it's the subtleties of it.
So Nikki, as you know, I was part of one of these artistic sport that was really focused on not just your body image, but, you know, feeling light in the water. And also it was pretty common for a lot of athletes to consistently have irregular period. So how do you explain that you can maintain performance for such a long period of time while you're not having a regular period? And are there consequences, long-term consequences of that situation?
Yes, you make a very good point. At the time, and by the way, as you may have guessed, I was one of these athletes while I was a dancer many years ago. I'm very old now. Anyway, you know, at the time you might feel fine and you might think, well, actually it's quite convenient that I'm not having regular periods, right? Yes, I know everyone's sort of smiling and nodding and it's like, well, this is quite convenient and I feel fine and I'm actually doing pretty well. I used to think that. It's like, listen, I can do my double pirouettes and does this really matter? But it's fool's gold. It will only be for yes, maybe a short time. It may be months, it may even be a year or more. Everything will seem fine on the surface. But underneath in your body, your hormones are definitely not happy if you're a woman and you've got irregular periods or they stop. So ultimately, number one, your performance will suffer. It will stagnate and then actually it might even just start declining. But also, whilst your hormones are low, your female hormones are low, unfortunately, because many of the body systems depend on these hormones for your health, there's going to be consequences, particularly bone health. Bones are very, very sensitive to the key female hormone, estrogen or estradiol. That's the most active form of estrogen. And so we know plenty of studies show this. Many of my colleagues in the States, Dr. Greg, you'll probably know, Dr. Kate Ackerman, done great studies showing that in female athletes whose periods stop, guess what? Stress fracture rate goes through the roof. Now, it's very interesting for the swimmers and for the cyclists, Myriam, because you're right. I know if you're like me, you hate running, right? So we won't get a stress fracture, but it will catch up with us, the low bone density, the poor bone health, okay? I see a lot of cyclists who, you know, they don't know they've got poor bone density until they do think, oh, well, actually, maybe I should do some weight-bearing exercise. I had an athlete, just such one, thought, oh, maybe I should do some weight-bearing exercise, started to run, stress fracture straight away, or fall off the bike, injury, you know. So long-term consequences of this are your performance will suffer, and definitely your bone health is one of the top things that we're really concerned about. And although some of it might be reversible, probably not all of it. I did a study with retired dancers several years ago, and I was actually pretty concerned that their bone density wasn't great, even though they had retired and their periods had come back. So, you know, you don't want to end up a retired athlete with, you know, the risk of getting fractures, and also cardiovascular health also suffers. So I'm afraid there's a long list of things that aren't good for you in the long term if you don't have periods. However inconvenient they might be, ultimately they are there for a reason, for your health and for your performance.
I've cared for many people, women in their relatively young, I mean, older, but relatively young, 60s, 70s, 80s, who have fractures. Mm-hmm. And it's devastating. Exactly. Completely devastating. There have been so many people, and I've seen this with my own eyes. They were fine. They were living independently. They had good lives. They were retired. They were enjoying themselves. They didn't need help. They were playing with their grandkids. I mean, life was perfect. It's just what you want in retirement. But then they took a fall, totally unexpected. And you can't prevent yourself from all of these falls. A loose stone in the pavement, it could be anything. You were distracted. Something was slippery at the grocery store. You fall, it's in a flash. You can't prevent it. And now you have a broken hip. And for many people, life is completely different after that. They can't walk as well. They may need to have a major surgery. They may not even be able to live in the house they were living in before, because it may become too difficult for them to go up and down the stairs or travel around. And so for people who are listening to this now, maybe you're 20, 25, you think, oh, this doesn't matter, who cares? It's a long way off. Like Dr. Keay said, the bone density effects may be long-term for some people, and this is a big deal. It's a big deal because so many people have just been devastated by these fractures as they get older, and you just cannot prevent all of them other than by having strong bones.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm afraid my own mother is someone who exactly, she was playing with my grandchildren, I mean, her grandchildren, my sons, doing sword fights and all sorts of things. She was a dancer. And you're right, it's really sad when you see that happen, the fracture and loss of independence and all that sort of thing. So it is for the long term, but actually, even if you're a 20-year-old listening to this, still thinking, well, 60 is a long way off. Number one, it will come round, but also actually, you know, from studies, you are already at very high risk of stress fracture in your 20s as well. And so stress fractures, yes, they can heal, but, you know, it's the usual thing. Once you've had one stress fracture, you're likely to get another one. And will it heal properly if you haven't got your regular periods? So it is actually imminent problems, but also in the longer term. And you definitely don't want to be in the situation you just described, Dr. Greg.
And I've actually, you know, the thing is, and we've all seen this, a lot of athletes, and I understand it, you know, I'm not an athlete, so I haven't had this exact emotion, but a lot of athletes, you know, you view yourselves in some ways as at least physically almost superhuman because you've overcome so many things. You run faster than anyone, you jump higher than anyone, your endurance is better than anyone. So you think that these things like fractures or even heart disease, like you mentioned, you think it won't happen to you because you're in such great shape. But it's shocking as people get older, how often these problems occur, despite the fact that you may have been the fastest one in town when you were younger.
Yeah, well, you see, this is the thing about the hormones, isn't it? Sorry, there's a slight delay here in London, so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's right, that's good.
But this is the work of the hormones, you see, because you can't see them, you can't feel them. So you feel good, you think you're jumping high and all this sort of thing. But actually, if your hormones aren't happy, you know, time will tell, time will show. So I think you make a very good point. You know, I was one of those myself. I thought I was invincible and things would never happen. And here I am sitting with 2 hip replacements anyway, but that's a different story. So
yeah. Nikki, I think that it happens not just in the long term. We see quite a lot of female athletes also have stress fracture while they're training. And you cannot necessarily attribute it all to, you know, overtraining, under eating, and hormones, but you know, sometimes it's explained by that. I want to shift a little bit to some other questions that we got that are related to menstruation and training. So one of the athletes asked if it's okay to train during menstruation, and does it impact performance?
I think it goes back to the personal again. I mean, you know, some women will find menstruation, you know, literally painful. And of course, you're losing blood. So that means you're losing iron. So you can feel fatigued as well. So there's not a reason why you shouldn't exercise, but it will depend how you feel. So if you feel okay, then fine, go for it. If you're experiencing things I described, you know, like pain, feeling fatigued, then actually there are studies to show that doing something is better than not doing anything. Because I know what it's like. If you're in pain, you just want to curl up. You don't want to move, do you? You don't want to do anything. But actually, just doing something very sort of almost elongating. It was actually, I think it was yoga that they showed in the study. It was helpful for period pain. Personally, I used to find actually swimming was quite good because it's that lovely feeling of being stretched out in the water and nice and long. So it's whatever works for you. There isn't a medical reason, hopefully you'll agree, Greg, why you shouldn't exercise, but it doesn't mean, you know, like I said, it's a personal thing. If you feel fine, great, do whatever you want to, bearing in mind to keep hydrated and have iron. But if you are one of the women that does have problems with in terms of cramps and things like this, then just make sure you're doing training that is a little bit lower key and something that sort of stretches the body, tries to relax the muscles. Is that your experience, Greg?
Yeah, I would agree. I'm not the best role model for this, I'll admit, but really people should be exercising just about every day. And you're absolutely right that to some degree, you have to you always have to listen to your body. And as an athlete, you're better at listening to your body than the rest of us, than someone like me is, because you're really in tune with how you're feeling and how much energy you have. So if your body is allowing you to do something, regardless of where you are in your menstrual cycle, you should exercise if you're an athlete, and you shouldn't feel bad about it. You should feel good and you should go do it. But you do have to listen to your body. And if you're at a point in your cycle when you know it's a downtime and you feel sluggish, then you just do what you can. But like you said, there's no medical reason not to do it. And I completely agree. You have to focus still, of course, on the fundamentals of health, like making sure you have enough iron, that you're not anemic, that you're hydrated well enough, that you're getting enough sleep, which often can be the cause of feeling low energy. You may not be sleeping enough for a variety of reasons, and then that's something you could fix. And so you can definitely improve your performance regardless of where you are in your menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
Do you two have recommendation? Some of the athletes have asked, their first day of periods are usually pretty painful. And so they're asking for the best and most natural ways to mitigate the pain on that first day.
Well, I think doing the stretching out, it was definitely in this study. I can't remember the reference. I don't know if you can, Greg, but it was saying that yoga, stretching, that thing about stretching the body, it just feels good for the cramps. And like I said, swimming. So trying to do those natural methods. And I think also Greg made a very good point there about sleep. We could do a whole webinar just on sleep. Sleep, honestly, to quote Shakespeare, it's the chief nourisher in life's great feast. So if in doubt, sleep. I'm not joking, right? Anyway, but I think if it's so bad that, then actually you should seek medical help. And I mean, I don't know what the name is in the US, but there is a specific medication that methamic acid, we call it here, that if the pain is so bad. But I think start off with those things we described, with the sleep, with the, the hydration, with the gentle movement, the stretching movements, even just stretching at home, whatever is going to work for you. It's better to try and move. Do you agree, Greg?
Yeah, I do. And I love talking about pain. By training, I'm an anesthesiologist. So we work a lot with pain issues, and there are some great things you could do. And the first one, I'm glad you mentioned this, is diagnosis. So if you're a woman who has debilitating menstrual pain, that may not be normal, and there may be a cause that you need to figure out. It could be something like endometriosis, for example, which might require medical treatment. So if your pain is severe, I would definitely recommend you get seen by a physician to make sure it's not caused by something that needs treatment. For everyone else, there are some great things you could do that help. And one of them is, of course, ibuprofen. I know it's not natural, but it works pretty well. And there's other similar drugs to ibuprofen that really could be quite effective. But if you're looking for more natural things, for some people, fish oil or omega-3 fats there's some evidence that actually decreases menstrual pain, and it decreases inflammation, and it has a lot of other health benefits. So for many people, I recommend high-dose omega-3 fats. For some people, B6 supplements can be helpful, so I would consider taking that and see if that helps you. Applying warmth, so warm packs or things that heat you can, for some women, also be helpful. And there's also a great thing, and I love this, and this is so useful for so many different pain conditions, and nobody really thinks about it, and it's so cheap, and it's so easy, and it's so safe. It's called a TENS unit.
Oh, yeah.
TENS, a TENS unit. You can get it from Amazon. They're like 25 bucks. I mean, it's the cheapest thing in the world. You think it's a gimmick, but for a lot of people, it works really, really well. And what it is you stick these pads, and you get these little pads, you stick them on yourself. It's hooked up to this gizmo, and it gives you this sort of like low voltage electric current.
Very low voltage, we have to say.
Yeah,
very low.
It's not as scary as it sounds.
No, they use it in childbirth, don't they?
Yeah, you use it for childbirth.
Yeah.
You could use it for joint pain. Like you could use it for all kinds of things, and it's great and it's safe. So I recommend trying one of those as well.
Good tip. Yeah.
Yeah, great tips, Dr. Greg. And I'm sticking to the menstrual cycle for a bit, and then we're going to move on to some other questions. One of the athletes said that to regulate her menstrual cycle, she's been prescribed birth control, which I think is pretty common. Maybe not anymore, but it was at least when I was swimming. This is not something that she's keen on taking. Are there any other solutions to regulate my cycle that don't involve taking pills?
Well, yes, you're right. Unfortunately, it's one of these things. Just because it's common doesn't mean it's right. Listen, taking the birth control pill or combined oral contraceptive, to give it its proper name, it can be very, very helpful for some medical conditions like polycystic ovary disease. We also mentioned endometriosis just then. It can be very, very useful. The reason why it's useful in these conditions is because it totally dampens your female hormones. And you do get a bleed, but it's a withdrawal bleed. It's not your own menstrual cycle. Okay, so certainly for some medical conditions, it's useful. If those have been identified, then often that's helpful. But in terms of regulating the cycle or giving you a period, I'm afraid that's incorrect. And again, I quote my colleague, Dr. Kate Ackerman, who wrote the Endocrine Society guidelines, say that if a woman isn't having her own periods, do not give her the birth control pill, because I've just told you that the birth control pill suppresses all your own hormones. And if your periods have stopped, we're trying to get the hormones back. We're not trying to dampen them more. But unfortunately, it's an easy thing. The doctor feels good, they're prescribing something, the doctor feels like they're doing something, the woman feels better because she's getting some bleeding, which she thinks, oh, maybe that is something like a period. So I think, going back to Dr. Greg's initial point, that if in doubt, always make sure, exclude any medical things going on. You know, why are your periods irregular is my first question. Get that sorted out. What's the reason for that? If it turns out that actually it's because you're not fueling enough, you're not sleeping enough, you're training too hard, you haven't got the right balance in those behaviors, then actually that's what you need to be doing, not taking a pill. Do you agree, Dr. Greg? I hope.
I do, and I agree with everything you said. And the one thing I'd add to it is, and this is a problem, unfortunately, we see a lot in Western medicine, is we're often treating the symptoms rather than the cause.
Yeah.
And so if you're a woman and you are not having your periods and you think, oh, I could take these pills and now I've got periods, everything's great. What you've done is you've made it look nice. You've treated the symptoms, but you haven't fixed the problem. There was still something that caused you to miss these periods in the first place. And so rather than sort of paper over it with pills, I would rather you figure out what's causing you to miss your periods in the first place and address that problem instead.
So that's so exactly right. And I think that's actually what it says in the endocrine guidelines. It says don't mask the problem by taking birth control pills. So yes, women, please, if your periods are irregular or they stop, you have to be a little bit insistent sometimes, or get in contact with either me or Greg, it will help you. You know, you have to be a little bit insistent. Like Greg says, you need to get to the bottom, the cause. Why has this happened? Make sure, hopefully it's not a medical thing. If so, then you deal with that. But actually so many times that I see, it's like you say, haven't got the right balance of those behaviors with the training, nutrition and sleep. And, you know, it's definitely possible to sort those out. It takes a little bit of, you know, puzzle of working out what it is. And don't worry, it will not necessarily be put on loads of weight, by the way. It's just the timing of these things that sometimes people haven't, for them as an individual. Just because your teammate, well, my teammate does that and she's having periods, it's like, well, good for her. But you're not a clone, okay? So it's what's right for you. That's the other important thing that a woman listening to this needs to bear in mind. Be confident, you're an individual, you know, your hormones are personal to you. So, you know, listen to your body and try and figure it out. And don't just rely on what somebody else has said that works for them.
Thank you, Nikki, because I think we need lots of reaffirmation of that. You can have regular menstruation and be an elite athlete and be in a top physical shape for your sport.
Well, I would say that that's essential. That's essential. That is absolutely an essential. You have to be healthy to perform. And so you might kid yourself, well, actually, I'm doing quite well, like I said, but honestly, it's short term, okay? And you won't be able to sustain that performance. You won't be able to reach your full potential, which is really frustrating. Imagine how much better you could be if you had your hormones on your side, right? And also we've mentioned the long-term things. And there are plenty of athletes, Gwen Jorgensen, who won the Olympics and world champion triathlon a couple of years ago. She had regular periods. She put all her periods up. I thought this was really, thank you, Gwen, for doing that. She put all her periods up so people could see, here is a top class athlete that's having regular periods. By the way, she's also gone to have a baby, I think 1 or 2, I'm not sure. Anyway, so I would say it's not possible. It's not only, oh, it's possible, it's essential.
Yeah. And so let's shift to that performance side, because I think we have some coaches that have questions on how you manage a team of female athletes who all have different cycles and different hormonal system. How do you have a recommendation on how you can manage athletes who go through the different cycle through the week and coach them somewhat?
Listen, I agree it's challenging. And I'm not a coach, by the way. I'm actually quite pleased about that because it is tricky. So even, all the, good coaches know that you have to have periodized training. You have to have harder weeks. You have to have light and shade, polarized training. Some is easier, some is harder, and the whole scheme of it. So, I know that there are plenty of good coaches know all of that. But listen, it is a challenge. We cannot deny that, because the thing is that not every woman will be exactly in sync. Hey, if they were all in sync, then you could have the 3 weeks of the slightly harder and the rest week, assuming they're all feeling the same in the luteal. Yes, but listen, realistically, that's not possible. So I think actually it goes down to the coach athlete, relationship, communication. And I work with plenty of excellent coaches here and worldwide who I would encourage those coaches not to be embarrassed. Obviously you have to put the words, in a formula that's not going to be confronting to the athlete, but it's a training metric. Basically, the menstrual cycle and periods, they're a training metric. Okay, so you have to kind of go with it. I know that the sessions, you can't make an individual session for every single woman in your group. I know that, and we can't change the calendar dates. But again, it's also the responsibility of the athlete. She's done all her recording, she knows what's good. Then she goes to her coach and says, listen, actually, you've set me this week, we're meant to be doing whatever it is, I don't know, intervals or something, but this is going to actually fall on a time in my cycle where I generally feel pretty bad. Is there a possibility I can, so it's that individual communication where there is flexibility in the program. It's up to the athlete to come forward, but also it's up to the coach to ask. The coach notices that one of the athletes is really struggling, and it's like, well, that's strange, because then just a quiet word, listen, is there something, are you tracking your cycles? Is there something that we can do? And there are plenty of, as I say, pen and paper, but there are plenty of good systems that we use at the ballet company, where you can have the menstrual tracking and the well-being side by side, and the training load, which is really, really handy. What are your tips? What do you think, Greg? What's your experience? What would you recommend there?
Well, so I work with a lot of different sports organizations, and I want to give a couple examples. It's not directly relevant, but I think it's instructive, from football and from baseball. So in American football, the NFL, there's good data that if you have a night game, and these happen from time to time, and then you have your team practice the next morning, it's devastating. They have terrible practices, they do a bad job, they're not getting enough sleep. When after a night game, you just don't get enough sleep. And so what sort of visionary NFL teams are doing is they're realizing, if we're having a night game, we have to adjust our training schedule to match the circumstances on the ground, which is we were up late because we had a night game. In baseball, teams have tons of games during the year, and they have to travel all over the US for these games. And so what was happening is these teams were crossing multiple time zones, and it was again interfering with their sleep. And so the league, the MLB, actually did what they could to kind of minimize these cross time zone travels, because they realized it was healthier for the players. So I mention this to say that no problem is insurmountable. Even something as big as time zone changes in baseball is a problem that we can solve if we're willing to roll up our sleeves and say, this is important and we're going to do it. And I agree with you, this is a difficult problem from a coach's standpoint, but it is certainly one that can be solved if we decide that it's important.
And having the flexibility, like you say, so, you know, if many coaches will use some sort of athlete monitoring system, and, you know, sometimes the athletes, for example, I'm the medical, so I see the training load, I see the well-being, I also see the menstrual cycle. So, but having some sort of system or communication or, you know, discussion with your athletes, just saying, listen, I'm here, you know, wanting to please come and tell me about if you've got particular times in your cycle, to make the flexibility of the training. I mean, like you say, there are limits. You can't change the whole schedule because otherwise it would just be impossible. But where there's, you know, for example, if they're meant to be doing 5 intervals and the woman has said, look, I'm feeling really bad in this time of my cycle, then fine, just say to her, okay, fine, you just do 4, right? You see what I mean? Just that flexibility, and it's the communication, isn't it? But you're right. Every challenge has a solution. So we don't want to give an absolute right, this is how you have to do it. But the thing is to talk about it. That's the most important thing.
So can we shift from, I'm trying to be more on the coach perspective. Can I make a big jump in performance by being more focused on my athlete's cycle, therefore timing my training at certain time in the cycle of my athletes will help have better performance? Is there a way where you're training at certain times in the months that will increase performance much faster than other times?
Yes, well, again, you know, it's down to the personal, because there have been, you know, some saying, oh, the best time to do strength training is in the follicular phase. So that's just before ovulation. But then there's been another study where they took a big look at lots of studies together. And the conclusion came out that there wasn't any difference between where you're good in your cycle. But I'll tell you why that came out like that, because some it was better, some it wasn't so good. So it all averaged out. So no woman is average, is the message, right? And so absolutely, for an individual woman, there probably is a sweet spot, a good time in her cycle. I just read a really interesting article in the cycling, a cycling magazine about a pro cyclist we have here in the UK, very good. And she said, yes, theoretically, I'm told I'm meant to be really super strong during this follicular phase of the cycle, the bit just before ovulation. And she said, indeed, her teammates around her, they're all, you know, speeding up the hill. But she said for her, that is the worst time in her cycle. Mm-hmm. But rather than, and so at first she was a bit worried. She thought, gosh, there's something wrong with me. But then she, you know, realized that actually this was just her. And so actually what it meant was her own expectations. She would do the session that was set with her teammates, but she would personally know and mention, of course, to her coach, listen, this is not, it's one of those days, right? Okay, so, but also being prepared that might happen, because I think it's also, you know, the mental side of it. It's like, I've read, you know, oh, my teammates are all saying that you should be good here and I'm not so good. So again, it's down to the individual. So it's the athlete's responsibility or interest, hopefully, to make a note what suits them, and then also to communicate with the coach. And so the coach proactively could also ask, you know, go around the athletes, or there are many ways of doing this. If the coach doesn't feel comfortable doing that, sometimes there's a senior female of the team could go, you know what I mean? There's so many ways to approach this, but you know, this is good coaches will have all their training of how to communicate with athletes. I'm not going to sort of say, oh, you have to do it exactly this way, but basically there has to be a communication. Do you agree, Greg? Is that's the solution, I think?
So one of the biggest trends in performance medicine is individualization. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned individualization. And here's the thing. We see this actually with hormone cycles. We see it with nutrition. We see it with sleep. We see it with so many different facets of sports performance. So let me give you an example. There is no, as you said, there's no optimal, say, training regimen. And there's no even optimal training time. For some people, they may be better off doing some of their training in a fasted state because it might improve their muscle efficiency at utilizing glucose. For other people, training in a fasted state could be disastrous because they'll have a poor performance and it may increase the risk of missing periods and all sorts of problems. So figuring out when the best time to do training, even during the day and relative to when you eat, is important. And for meals, there's no single best diet for an athlete. Everybody's different. And there are new tools now that we could use, like a continuous glucose monitor, for example. It's a little thing, it goes under the skin, and it measures your response to food. And one woman's response may be different than another woman's response. And if you have a thoughtful nutritionist or physician working with your team, you can optimize things like sleep and diet and your hormone cycles and everything else to improve performance. The problem is that, and certainly we see this in the US, it's expensive to do this. You probably have to hire a sports performance physician or nutritionist. There may not be money for it. People may not have the time. But the truth is, if you can do this, it's one of the best ways of supercharging your team's performance.
But it doesn't have to be expensive and complicated. I mean, if you're listening to this and thinking, goodness, how do I get access to all of this? I can't. Then honestly, I think I'm definitely showing my age now when I say when I used to be a competitive swimmer, which is a long time ago as a teenager, we used to have pen and paper. We used to have to do training logs. Do you remember those? You have to write down what your session is. We had to write down our resting heart rate every morning, equivalent of the well-being score, by the way. We had to write down how we were feeling, all this stuff. So if you're listening to this and thinking, oh my goodness, this sounds way too complicated and expensive, it honestly does not have to be. And so a pen and paper, just starting by tracking your cycle, making notes of how you're feeling during your cycle. And also, like you say, make a note of your sleep. Because then if you make a note of your sleep and you train one day and you think, oh my goodness, that was a really bad session, and you look down and you think, oh, well, that's because I had only 6 hours sleep or something, it becomes obvious, it becomes easier to see the patterns for yourself. So be your own sports physician for you, right? Make your notes, and then, as you say, if you have those notes and there is a problem that you've identified, then you have those notes, you can present them, and it makes it easier for us as the doctors if we have some information about you. So, do as much as you can. It doesn't have to be complicated or expensive.
I like what you said about writing stuff down, and I just want to add to that because I have all of my clients write stuff down. People's memories are not so great. And so I'll use myself as an example. If you had asked me 6 months ago, do I eat much bread? I would have said, no, not really, here and there, but not too much. And so I started doing dietary tracking on myself, and it's not complicated. I don't write down exactly how much of everything I eat, but I take pictures of what I eat and I just kind of write down what I'm eating. And whoa, I eat way more bread than I realized I did. Yeah, my memory was totally off. And so you kind of remember things the way you want to and not actually the way it is. And so your sleep thing, maybe you like staying up late. Maybe you like doing things at night. And so in your mind, you've somehow convinced yourself that staying up late doesn't affect your performance. But if you wrote it down and you see, oh, I was up late on Tuesday and Wednesday, I did not have a good training session, and you see that over and over again, that doesn't lie.
And it's the same thing for the menstrual cycles. I had an athlete that said, kind of like you said, that every time just before the week before her period, she had like premenstrual syndrome, just feeling really sluggish and bloated and just like dreadful. But she said it was crazy because she almost forgot. Every 4 weeks she would forget And so when she came to me and said, oh, I'm feeling really bad. And I said, well, is this a cyclical pattern? Have you written it down? She was like, oh, no. And then she wrote it. And then it's like, oh, gosh, now I can see where it is. So it's informative for you. Because like you say, your memory, you know, you think you know, but actually just committing it to paper, it doesn't have to be every single detail and every single day, but just to get an idea over a month, for example, of the menstrual cycle, just making those annotations for yourself, that can be really, really helpful. And as I say, you don't have to write a whole essay, just the key points, you know.
And what I retain from you guys is that you need to track what you do, one, to see where the challenges are, where the correlations are between the different aspects of your life, the different wellness aspect. So tracking your cycle, your sleep, your nutrition, your exercise, and how you feel will help you figure out when in the months or during, you know, the 6 months period there are challenges, or whether you don't have your period for a long period of time. Like just the tracking will give you enough information to be able to make some adjustment. I have shared in the chat an app called Vexa, which is an exercise analytics app for athletes. There is a free version of it where you can just basically enter your daily data and it covers those elements, and will automatically give you the graph and see how things are evolving for you. So that's a good tool. There's plenty others. I do have also like daily trim data sheets that we've used in the past that we can share afterwards. So I think tracking your wellness and your performance will give you a lot more insight, and it's something that every athlete can do and can really be more proactive with that. And I think being able to have this data and showing that to your coach is much easier than coming and saying, well, I don't feel good today. Well, there's no,
it's very vague, isn't it? It's difficult for the coach then, isn't it? So it's difficult. But basically also making these observations about you, and we keep saying that every woman is an individual, is very informative for you. And also it empowers you. You feel good. It's like, right, now I understand it, you know? It's like, and you know, then you feel, right, I can take control of this. Because I think lots of women feel, oh, it's like kind of out of control somehow. That, oh, my periods have stopped and I don't know why and whatever, or I'm feeling really bad and I don't know why. But actually, you know, there will be a reason. It might hopefully all be something, you know, straightforward that you can correct yourself, or actually, you know, it will also direct you if actually there is a problem that is really quite severe and keeps recurring, that you do need to seek medical advice. So either way, it will give you you know, confidence, should I say, and so you can make informed decisions about what to do.
There's one question we haven't covered that relates more to your menstruation cycle over time and over your lifespan. And a lot of athletes, you know, would have delayed periods, onset of their periods. Can you talk just a little bit on that? You know, what are the different changes? Because that could be seen as irregular when it's actually just your onset or different periods of your life.
Yeah, very good point. So menarche is the posh medical word for your start of your periods. The average age is 12, but some athletes, it will be a little bit later, but the cutoff is 16 or your 16th birthday. I think in the US you say 15, but I'm in the UK. Listen, on your 16th birthday, if your periods have not started, whether you're an athlete or not, you need to get that checked out, because that's a warning sign. Something is amiss, okay? It could be there's a medical thing, or it could be like we were saying, you've got this imbalance of behaviors. So your periods will start then, and then they should be relatively regular, okay? And by regular, we mean a cycle length of anything between 21 days and 35 days. So not every woman will be 28 every single time. So don't get worried about that, but within that range. Anything shorter or anything longer, again, it looks like there isn't something quite right with the hormones. And so this should continue until you're reaching the menopause at the other end of the scale. That's average age of that is 51, and that's when your periods stop. But there is a very tricky and I can confirm it's tricky. Been there, done that. There's a very tricky time during your 40s when the periods are irregular or can be irregular. Not every woman, but it's called perimenopause. It's like the transition from having regular periods to them stopping. But as you can imagine, it's not a light switch. It's not one day, oh, I'm having regular periods, and the next day now they're finished. There is a transition time, and it's variable. From the age of 40 onwards, it can start happening, or it might be that it's only the year before. It's very variable. But that is a really tricky one. And I think that's what you're alluding to, Myriam, that your periods can be irregular and also you don't feel so great. I can also confirm that's the case, right, by the way. You don't feel so good in training. You feel tired. You just feel a bit brain foggy. You just don't feel great. And your emotions are a bit all over the place. So not every woman will have all of these things, but even just one of them, and this is pretty tricky. Is this perimenopause, or is this, like we've been talking about, the situation where you haven't got the right balance of your behaviors? And so that's a really challenging time. There's no two ways to put that. And that's where the thing I mentioned earlier at the very start, where we're making some progress here in the UK and hopefully to everybody worldwide. If we can map your hormones, see what they're doing over the cycle, we can distinguish between, is it perimenopause? Are the ovaries becoming like going into retirement, or is it that your behaviors aren't balanced? So that's what happens. And then when you reach the menopause, or if you're really suffering with perimenopause, HRT, hormone replacement therapy, I think we do have to talk about that, because I know there has been bad press about HRT. No two ways about it. We know that in 2000. But actually, since that original paper, we now know that HRT actually is really, number one, it's actually safe. And more importantly, it's pretty essential for quality of life and for your long-term health. We were mentioning long-term health earlier about as you get older and when your periods stop and your estrogen goes very low, yes, your bones do get weaker. Yes, you are more at risk of cardiovascular disease. So by taking HRT, number one, I can definitely say it makes you feel a lot better, or normal again, normal for you, but also it's for the long-term health. And I work with a lot of masters athletes who have gone through this very tricky bit where they're in perimenopause, and actually then they start on HRT and they start to feel much better. Yeah, HRT, I think there will be some women for whom it's contraindicated if you've got a personal family history of breast cancer, but generally it's always worth a discussion. And it's one of those informed decision things, and knowing the facts about HRT. And at this point I will bring up this book we have in England, the British Menopause Society. I'm a member of that, and it gives very clear evidence about the pros and the cons of HRT. And actually there are much less cons than many women realize maybe. And so I think we should be doing a better job on that. What are your views, Dr. Greg? Do you see many masters athletes in HRT? What's your experience?
Well, I think the key of the day really is, and this has come up so often, but I think it's important, is individualization.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I think what often happens is, like you were mentioning, the perimenopause situation. A lot of times athletes will ask their friends or the other people on their team or their coach, and they'll say, well, my periods are regular now and I'm 43. And they'll be like, oh, that's because you're in perimenopause. And that may be true, but it may not be true. And so the thing is, it's great to talk to people, and it's wonderful to get people's advice. But at the end of the day, for these types of things, you have to see a physician and get evaluated. Because number one, just because it's happening to your friend doesn't mean it's happening to you. Your friend might be wrong. And, the guidelines change all the time. Like you mentioned, HRT, it's obviously there's some controversy about it. One day we shouldn't, one day we should. And hopefully if you go to a physician who's experienced with this, they'll know what the current recommendations are. They'll be able to evaluate you, and then you'll be able to come up with the correct decision. So I think the problem is that we often too often, in fact, rely on our teammates or our coaches for these types of medical questions, and you really have to see a doctor for this type of thing.
Yes, I mean, listen, of course, it's helpful to talk to friends and coaches and whoever for moral support, as it were, you know, and that's great. I think we should talk about it, but you're absolutely right. Ultimately, you know, to get the most up-to-date and correct recommendations that are right for you as an individual, you do have to see someone with experience, medically qualified, and ideally someone who, you know, is used to dealing with menopause, perimenopause, and HRT, and can give you the correct advice and titrate the dose that's right for you. So I think, so on the one hand, yes, please do talk about it, but don't, you know, unless they're a qualified doctor with experience, you know, don't take it as read that, oh, well, that must be right. Do your own information, make an informed decision. I think it's what we keep going back to, isn't it? Yeah. And make the right decision, the decision that's right for you with all the facts to hand.
Nikki, thank you, because we just reaching the end of our webinar, but that's okay. I wanted to reinforce some of the things you've said throughout this hour. We're all different, and that's okay. Your health is your most important assets, and that will help get you to peak performance. So pay attention to your body, your health, track your data so that you can see what your patterns are, and work with your physician and someone who is an expert and experienced in the field that you're concerned with, whether it's your hormones or other aspects of your health. So thank you to your boss for the time, all this great information. I think it was very, very interesting and educative. Thanks to our sponsors again. I wanted to tell everybody that we'll have the recording of this event on the Women's Sports Forum website. We will share it with you by email this week as well. I'm going to share the website for the Women's Sports Forum here in the chat box, as well as Nikki's website if you want to get in touch with her. Yeah, any further information, you know, feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to reach out to Greg, Nikki, or myself if you have further questions you want to answer, or if you have ideas for topics that you want us to cover in the next live Q&A. We do this event once a month with Dr. Greg. And so, yeah, feel free to reach out afterwards. Thank you to both of you, and thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks, Myriam.
And thank you to Athletes for Care, Athlete Soul, Sports Philanthropy Network, and She Media for sponsoring this event. And you did a great job, Myriam, and Nikki, Dr. Nikki, I learned so much from you. So thank you, and thank you everybody for attending.